You ever notice how the loudest response is no response at all? He rejected you, walked away like what you had didn't matter. And now every part of you is screaming to say something. Send that text, make that call, explain your heart one more time. But listen to me. That urge right there, that's where most people lose their power, because what you don't realize is this: your silence is speaking for you. Loud, clear, unforgettable. See, he expected tears. He expected questions. He expected you to chase him, to prove your worth, to fight for his attention. But what he didn't expect was your absence. And now, that silence is sitting heavy on his mind, making him think, making him wonder, making him question everything. Because when a woman who cared deeply suddenly goes quiet, it don't feel like peace, it feels like loss. Silence protects your dignity. Let me tell you something straight. Dignity is one of the few things in this world that once you give it away, it's hard to get back. And rejection? Oh, rejection has a way of testing that dignity like nothing else. The moment someone walks away from you, especially someone you cared about, there's this storm that rises inside you. Your mind starts racing, your heart starts questioning, and your emotions start pushing you to do things you normally wouldn't do. You feel this overwhelming urge to explain yourself, to ask why, to prove that you're worth staying for. But right there, in that very moment, is where the line gets drawn between losing yourself and standing firm in who you are. Because every time you chase someone who already made a decision about you, you slowly start lowering your own value in your own eyes. See, dignity isn't just about how others see you. It's about how you carry yourself when nobody else is validating you. When you choose silence after rejection, you are choosing self-respect over temporary emotional relief. You are telling yourself, I don't need to beg for understanding. I don't need to convince someone to see my worth. And that right there is powerful, because most people don't have the strength to do that. Most people react. They call, they text, they send long paragraphs trying to make sense of something that already made its decision. But all that does is give the other person control over your emotions. And worse, it sends a message that your presence in their life is negotiable. When you go silent, you take that negotiation off the table. You stop trying to sell something that should never have been up for sale in the first place, your value. Because here's the truth. The right person doesn't need convincing. The right person doesn't need a presentation, a speech, or a second chance to see what you bring to the table. If someone can walk away from you without hesitation, then your silence is not punishment, it's alignment. It's you stepping back into your own worth and refusing to shrink just to fit into someone else's limited perception of you. And let's be real for a second. There's a certain kind of strength in holding back when everything inside you wants to react. That strength builds something in you. It builds discipline. It builds confidence. It reminds you that your emotions don't control you. Control them, because dignity isn't loud. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It stands still, calm and grounded, knowing that anything meant for you won't require you to lose yourself to keep it. People notice that kind of energy, whether they admit it or not. When you don't respond the way they expected, when you don't break down or come running back, it creates a different kind of respect. Not the kind that comes from trying too hard, but the kind that comes from knowing you won't tolerate being treated as an option. And even more importantly, you start to respect yourself more. You start to see that you are capable of choosing your peace over your impulses, your self-worth over your fears. Because at the end of the day, rejection doesn't define you, but how you respond to it does. And when you respond with silence, you're not being weak, you're being wise. You're protecting the one thing that makes you irreplaceable, your dignity. Silence creates curiosity. Let me explain something that most people overlook. Human nature is wired to chase what it doesn't fully understand and to question what it suddenly loses access to. The moment he rejected you, he believed the story was finished. In his mind, he assumed you would react the way most people do. Reach out, ask questions, try to fix things, or fight to stay connected. That expectation gave him a sense of certainty, And certainty creates comfort. But when you choose silence instead of reaction, you interrupt that expectation completely. You remove the script he thought he was following, and now he's left trying to figure out what just happened. That's where curiosity begins. See, when you don't respond, when you don't chase, when you don't give him emotional access anymore, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is powerful because it forces the other person to think. He starts asking himself questions he never planned to ask. Why hasn't she reached out? Why is she so calm? Did she move on already? Did I mean less to her than I thought? That silence creates a gap between what he expected and what actually happened. And the human mind does not like gaps. It tries to fill them. It replays moments. It searches for answers. And in that process, you stay on his mind without saying a single word. Now understand this clearly. When you were always available, when you were consistently showing up, giving attention, expressing care, you were easy to read. There was no mystery, no space for him to wonder because everything was right there in front of him. And while consistency is valuable in the right relationship, in a situation where someone has chosen to walk away, that same availability can work against you. It removes the element of discovery. But silence reintroduces that element. It shifts you from being predictable to being intriguing, from being accessible to being distant. And distance has a way of magnifying value in people's minds. There's also something deeper happening here. Curiosity isn't just about wondering what you're doing. It's about questioning the decision that led to losing access to you. When your presence is gone, it forces him to revisit what you brought into his life. The conversations, the energy, the attention, the emotional connection, all of it becomes more noticeable in your absence. And because you're no longer there to remind him directly, his own mind starts doing that work. That's far more powerful than anything you could say because people believe what they conclude on their own more than what they're told. And here's the part most people miss. Curiosity grows stronger in silence than it ever does in explanation. The more you try to explain yourself, the more you reduce the space for someone to think about you. You answer questions before they even fully form. But when you say nothing, those questions stay alive. They expand. They repeat. They linger longer than any message you could send. Your silence becomes a presence of its own, something he can't ignore because there's no closure attached to it. This doesn't mean you're playing games or trying to manipulate emotions. It means you are respecting yourself enough to not overextend where you are no longer valued. The curiosity that follows is simply a natural consequence of that choice. It's what happens when access is removed and expectations are broken. And whether he acts on that curiosity or not is no longer your concern because the real shift has already happened. You've stopped trying to be understood by someone who chose not to understand you. So when you stay silent, you're not disappearing. You're becoming unforgettable in a different way. You're allowing your absence to speak where your presence was once overlooked. And in that space, curiosity does what words never could. Silence shifts the power. Let's get something clear right now. Power in any relationship isn't about control, it's about emotional independence. And the moment he rejected you, it probably felt like he took all the power with him. He made the decision, he walked away, and now you're left dealing with the aftermath. That kind of situation can make anyone feel small, like the balance has been tilted and there's nothing you can do about it. But here's what most people don't realize. Power is not fixed. It's not something someone can permanently take from you. It shifts based on how you respond, how you carry yourself, and most importantly, what you choose to give your energy to. When you react emotionally, when you chase, when you ask for explanations, when you try to hold on, you're handing that power right back to him. You're showing him that your emotional state is tied to his decisions, that your peace depends on his presence. And once someone feels that level of control, even unintentionally, the dynamic becomes one-sided. You start waiting for responses, overanalyzing actions, hoping for signs, while he moves freely without that same emotional weight. That's not balance. That's dependency. Now here's where silence changes everything. The moment you stop reacting, the moment you pull your energy back, the moment you decide that you're no longer going to engage in a situation where you're not valued, you shift the entire dynamic. Because now, instead of you wondering what he's thinking, he's left wondering about you. Instead of you waiting for a message, there's a silence he can't read, can't predict, and can't control. And that uncertainty, that's where the shift begins. Silence removes access. It cuts off the emotional feedback loop that he was used to. He no longer knows if you're hurt, if you're angry, if you've moved on, or if you even think about him anymore. And when someone loses that insight, they lose a sense of control over the situation. Because control isn't just about making decisions. It's about understanding the emotional landscape. And your silence takes that understanding away. It forces him into a position where he has to sit with the unknown. And most people are uncomfortable there. At the same time, something important is happening within you. By choosing silence, you are reclaiming your focus. You are no longer centering your thoughts around his actions or his absence. You're redirecting that energy back into yourself, your growth, your healing, your life. And that's real power. Not the kind that comes from trying to influence someone else, but the kind that comes from being grounded in who you are, regardless of who stays or leaves. There's also a psychological shift that takes place. When you're always available, always responsive, always present, people subconsciously assume that access to you is guaranteed. But when that access is removed, its value increases. It's no longer something they can rely on without effort. And that change in perception alters how they see you. Not because you said anything, not because you demanded anything, but because your actions, or in this case, your lack of reaction, redefine the dynamic. Understand this clearly. Silence is not about punishing the other person. It's not about creating distance to make them suffer. It's about creating boundaries that protect your peace and restore your sense of self. The shift in power is simply a result of that boundary. It happens naturally when you stop overextending yourself in situations that don't reciprocate your energy. And the most important part of all this is that you begin to feel that shift internally before anything changes externally. You start to feel less anxious, less desperate for answers, less tied to outcomes you can't control. You begin to realize that your stability doesn't depend on someone else's choices. And once you reach that point, the dynamic has already changed in the most important way. It no longer has the same hold on you. Because real power isn't about getting someone back. It's about getting yourself back. And silence is often the first step in making that happen. Silence forces him to face his decision. Let's talk about consequences. Because every decision carries one, whether people are ready for it or not. When he chose to walk away from you, he made a decision in a moment where he likely felt certain, maybe even confident, that it was the right move. And in that moment, it's easy for someone to feel comfortable with their choice, especially if nothing challenges it. But here's the truth. Most people don't fully understand the weight of their decisions until they're forced to sit with the results of them, without distraction, without reassurance, and without access to what they left behind. Now, this is where most people make a mistake. Instead of allowing that decision to stand on its own, they rush in to soften it. They reach out, they try to stay connected. They offer emotional availability even after being rejected. And what that does is it cushions the impact of his choice. It tells him, you can walk away, but you don't actually lose me. So he never truly feels the absence, never fully experiences the consequence. And because of that, he never has to confront what he gave up. You unintentionally make it easier for him to move on without reflection. But when you choose silence, you remove that cushion completely. You step back and suddenly the decision he made is no longer comfortable. There's no more access to your presence, no more emotional support, no more connection to fall back on. It's just him and the reality of what he chose. And that kind of silence creates a space where reflection becomes unavoidable. because now there's nothing distracting him from the outcome of his action. Understand something important. People don't always evaluate their choices in the moment they make them. They evaluate them later when the emotions settle, when the distractions fade, and when the absence of what they had becomes noticeable. Your silence accelerates that process. It creates a clear contrast between what was and what is. And in that contrast, he starts to see things differently. The conversations you shared, the support you gave, the way you showed up, all of it becomes more visible when it's no longer there. There's also a psychological reality at play here. When someone has constant access to you, they don't have to imagine life without you because you're still present in some form. But when that access is gone, the mind naturally fills in the gap. It starts to replay memories, revisit moments, and question the finality of the decision. And because you're not there to offer reassurance or clarity, those thoughts don't get resolved quickly. They linger, they repeat. They grow stronger over time. Silence also removes the opportunity for him to justify his decision through your reactions. If you argue, if you plead, if you try to change his mind, it gives him reasons to stand firm in his choice. It reinforces whatever narrative he created to walk away in the first place. But when you say nothing, when you don't engage, when you don't react, there's no resistance to push against. There's no drama to validate his decision. There's just stillness. And in that stillness, he has to look inward instead of outward. At the same time, your silence communicates something without words. It shows that you respect his decision enough not to fight it, but you also respect yourself enough not to chase after it. That balance is powerful because it removes any illusion that you're trying to hold on to something that has already been let go. It makes the separation real. It makes the loss tangible. And once something becomes real in that way, it's much harder to ignore. What you're doing here is not forcing him to feel anything artificially. You're simply allowing reality to take its natural course. You're giving his decision the space to exist without interference. And in that space, its true weight begins to reveal itself. Whether that leads to regret, realization, or acceptance is no longer something you need to control. Because the moment you stepped into silence, you stopped managing his experience and started honoring your own. Silence helps you heal it, shift the focus for a moment. Because up until now, it's been easy to think about what he's feeling, what he's thinking, and how your silence affects him. But the real power of silence has very little to do with him and everything to do with you. Because healing doesn't happen in noise. It doesn't happen when you're constantly checking your phone, rereading old messages, replaying conversations, or looking for signs that he still cares. Healing happens in the quiet moments, the ones where you're left alone with your thoughts and forced to confront what you're truly feeling. When someone rejects you, it creates a wound that isn't just about them. It touches your sense of self. It makes you question your worth, your decisions, your ability to be loved the way you deserve. And if you're not careful, you'll try to fix that wound externally. You'll look for answers from the same person who created the confusion. You'll try to stay connected, hoping that a conversation, an explanation, or even a small sign of attention will ease the pain. But that kind of relief is temporary, and more often than not, it keeps the wound open instead of allowing it to close. Silence interrupts that cycle. It creates a boundary between you and the source of your emotional distress. And while that boundary might feel uncomfortable at first, it's necessary. Because every time you don't reach out, every time you resist the urge to check in, every time you choose not to reopen that door, you are giving yourself a chance to process what happened without interference. You're allowing your emotions to settle naturally instead of constantly being triggered by new interactions. There's also a deeper level of healing that comes from reclaiming your attention. When you're caught up in someone else's absence, your mind tends to orbit around them. You think about what they're doing, who they're with, whether they miss you, whether they'll come back. That mental loop can be exhausting, and it keeps you stuck in a place where your energy is invested in something you no longer have control over. Silence helps break that loop. It gives you the space to redirect your focus back to your own life, your own goals, your own well-being. And that redirection is where growth begins. Because as you spend less time thinking about him, you start to notice yourself again. You start to reconnect with the parts of you that may have been neglected while you were focused on the relationship. Your interests, your passions, your sense of independence, all of it begins to resurface. You realize that your identity is not tied to someone else's decision to stay or leave. It exists on its own and is stronger than you thought. Silence also teaches you emotional discipline. It shows you that you don't have to act on every feeling that comes up. Just because you miss him doesn't mean you need to reach out. Just because you feel hurt doesn't mean you need to express it to someone who has already chosen distance. Learning to sit with those emotions, to feel them without immediately reacting, builds a kind of resilience that will serve you in every area of your life. It gives you control over your responses instead of letting your emotions control you. Over time, something subtle but powerful starts to happen. The intensity of the pain begins to fade, not because you forced it to, but because you gave it the space to run its course. You stop looking for closure from him because you start finding it within yourself. You accept what happened, not because you agree with it, but because you understand that holding on to it is no longer serving you. And in that acceptance, there's freedom. Freedom from needing answers, freedom from waiting, freedom from tying your happiness to someone who's no longer present. That's what real healing looks like. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not something that happens overnight. It's quiet, steady, and often invisible to others. But it's real and it's lasting because in the end, silence doesn't just help you move on from him. It helps you return to yourself. Silence shows you know your worth. Let me tell you something that a lot of people don't fully understand. Your worth is not something you prove. It's something you demonstrate through what you tolerate and what you walk away from. And when someone rejects you, the situation immediately tests that worth. Not in how they treated you, but in how you respond afterward. Because it's easy to say you value yourself when everything is going right, when you're being chosen, appreciated, and prioritized. But the real definition of self-worth shows up when you are not chosen, when you are overlooked, when someone decides to walk away from you. That's where your actions start speaking louder than any words you could ever say. When you choose silence after rejection, you are making a statement without needing to explain it. You are saying, I understand my value, and I'm not going to chase someone who couldn't see it. And that kind of mindset is rare because most people feel the need to be validated externally. They want reassurance, they want answers, they want to feel like they mattered. So they reach out, they try to stay connected, they attempt to keep a door open that someone else has already closed. But every time you do that, you send a message not just to them, but to yourself that your presence is something people can accept or reject without consequence. Silence changes that message completely. It establishes a boundary that says access to you is a privilege, not a guarantee. It shows that if someone decides not to choose you, they also lose the benefits of having you in their life. And that's not about punishment, it's about alignment. It's about understanding that your energy, your time, and your emotional investment are valuable. And they should be shared with people who recognize that value, not with those who overlook it. There's also a level of confidence that comes with silence that cannot be faked. It's not loud, it's not attention-seeking, and it doesn't rely on approval. It's steady, it's grounded, and it's self-assured. When you don't feel the need to explain yourself or justify your absence, it shows that you are secure in your decision. You're not waiting for them to understand you because you already understand yourself. And that kind of confidence shifts how people perceive you because it reflects a level of emotional maturity that stands out. At the same time, silence protects you from compromising your standards. When you continue engaging with someone who has already shown you they don't value you the same way, you start to lower your expectations just to maintain a connection. You accept less communication, less effort, less respect, all in the hope of keeping something alive. But when you go silent, you remove yourself from that dynamic entirely. You stop settling, you stop negotiating your needs, and you start reinforcing the standard that if someone wants access to you, they have to meet you at a level that aligns with your worth. This also builds a stronger relationship with yourself. Because every time you choose silence over chasing, you are reinforcing trust within yourself. You're proving that you can handle discomfort without abandoning your self-respect. You're showing yourself that you don't need external validation to feel secure. And over time, that builds a kind of inner confidence that doesn't shake easily because it's rooted in your own choices, not in someone else's behavior. And here's something important to understand. Knowing your worth doesn't mean you won't feel hurt. It doesn't mean you won't miss them or think about what could have been. It simply means that those feelings don't control your actions. It means you can acknowledge the pain without letting it dictate your behavior. You can care about someone and still choose yourself at the same time. That balance is what separates emotional strength from emotional reaction. Because at the end of the day, people will treat you based on what you allow. And when you respond to rejection with silence, you are showing that you do not allow yourself to be placed in situations where you are not valued. You are setting a standard not just for others, but for yourself. And once that standard is set, it becomes the foundation for every relationship you allow into your life moving forward. Final message, your silence is your power. In the end, your silence is not weakness. It's strength in its purest form. It's you choosing self-respect over attention, peace over confusion, and growth over attachment. You didn't lose him. He lost access to someone who knew how to love deeply and stand strong alone. And if your silence makes him think, wonder, or even regret, understand, that's not your responsibility anymore. Your job is to move forward, to heal, and to become the version of yourself that no longer chases what doesn't choose you. Stay silent, stay grounded, and watch how your life begins to align with what you truly deserve.